Hey there, how's it going? I'm Lilay. Today we're going to talk about the book Wuthering Heights. It's written by Emily Brontë. This is Emily's only novel, an epic tale of love, hate, betrayal, and revenge. Wuthering Heights fully portrays the wildness, passion, and heavy suppression of human nature, creating a vivid and painful experience akin to a Moor. Reading Wuthering Heights has 3 levels. The first level sees love and hate. The second level sees human nature. The third level leads to eternal belief.
Let's talk about what Wuthering Heights is like. It's described in the novel as the name of Mr. Heathcliff's residence. Wuthering is a profound adjective used to express the weather that the place endures during storms. This place sounds uninviting, even a little eerie, which adds to its mystery. The story of Wuthering Heights unfolds in this isolated moor. On a stormy day, Lockwood, a young tenant of Thrushcross Grange, visits Mr. Heathcliff, the landlord of Wuthering Heights. The landlord is unfriendly, but due to the bad weather, Lockwood can't leave immediately, so he has to stay at Wuthering Heights.
He meets the people around Mr. Heathcliff, including the indifferent daughter-in-law, the servant Hareton, and others who behave very strangely and unfriendly towards Lockwood. This makes Lockwood very uncomfortable. Just when his anger and frustration are about to peak, a housekeeper named Zillah steps forward and shows him some kindness, which soothes Lockwood's emotions. Zillah leads Lockwood to a room to rest, and he discovers that the windowsill of the house is covered with writing. Upon closer inspection, he sees a name repeated over and over again: Catherine Earnshaw, Catherine Heathcliff, Catherine Linton. That name strikes him, Catherine. Let's remember it. This makes Lockwood curious about this Catherine. Who is she? Lockwood starts to peruse the notes and diaries she left behind, the naive strokes of her pen recording a young girl's joys and sorrows. As Lockwood reads on, he gradually falls into a drowsy sleep. The scene that follows is quite terrifying. Let's read a passage.
Before long, the howling wind rattled the branches of the fir trees, tapping at Lockwood's window. Lockwood, intending to roll over and go back to sleep, found the branches too bothersome. He got out of bed and punched through the glass with his fist, reaching out to grab the tangled branch. But instead of grabbing the branch, he caught hold of a cold, small hand. A melancholic voice sobbed, "Let me in, let me in." "Who are you?" I asked, struggling meanwhile to disengage myself. "Catherine Linton," it replied shiveringly. "I'm come home. I'd lost my way on the moor." As it spoke, I discerned obscurely a child's face looking through the window. Terror made me cruel, and finding it useless to attempt shaking the creature off, I pulled its wrist onto the broken pane, and rubbed it to and fro till the blood ran down and soaked the bedclothes. Still it wailed, "Let me in," and maintained its tenacious gripe, almost maddening me with fear. I seemed to keep them closed above a quarter of an hour, yet the instant I listened again there was the doleful cry moaning on. "It is 20 years, mourned the voice. 20 years. I've been a waif for 20 years.
Just when Lockwood was about to collapse, Mr. Heathcliff appeared at the door of the room. Although he was very angry that Lockwood had slept in this room, when he heard Catherine's name, his emotions were evidently stirred. Heathcliff asked Mr. Lockwood to leave the room, and when he went in, he opened the window and sobbed bitterly. Come in, Cathy, do come. Oh, my heart's darling." This scene was completely different from Heathcliff's usual demeanor, and his mournful appearance evoked pity in Lockwood. But after leaving the room, Heathcliff immediately reverted to his bad temper, scolding Zillah and his daughter-in-law who was reading. So, Wuthering Heights exudes a strangeness everywhere. Tangled in nightmares all night long, at this moment, Lockwood had no mood, no energy to explore what had happened at the manor. He just wanted to go back to Thrushcross Grange. When the housekeeper, Mrs. Dean, came to deliver dinner, Lockwood couldn't help asking her about the situation of Heathcliff's family. So, the secret about 2 families and 3 generations slowly unfolded in Mrs. Dean's narration.
The story goes like this. At that time, the master of Wuthering Heights was still Mr. Earnshaw, who had a son named Hindley and a daughter named Catherine. Once, Mr. Earnshaw went to Liverpool on business, and a few days later, he returned with a dirty child. This child was found by Mr. Earnshaw on the streets of Liverpool. After inquiring for a long time and not finding the child's relatives, he brought the orphan back and named him Heathcliff. This was originally the name of Mr. Earnshaw's other son, but sadly, that little boy died young. Out of a strange, inexplicable affection, Mr. Earnshaw treated this boy named Heathcliff with special fondness.
This stirred resentment in his own son Hindley, who often clashed physically with Heathcliff. Unlike Hindley, his daughter Catherine was close in age to Heathcliff, and the two gradually became good playmates, their relationship growing stronger. Except for old Mr. Earnshaw and Catherine, nobody in the household liked Heathcliff. Living in this abnormal state, Heathcliff suppressed both pride and inferiority in his heart. In fact, he didn't feel warmth, which made his character volatile and eccentric. When old Mr. Earnshaw noticed Hindley bullying Heathcliff often, he intervened and sent his own son Hindley away to study elsewhere, getting him out of the house. With Hindley's mischief gone, Catherine and Heathcliff's affection deepened over time. Unfortunately, this blissful time only lasted for 3 years, until Mr. Earnshaw passed away. Next, Hindley returned to Wuthering Heights with his new wife, becoming the master of the estate. Years of accumulated resentment finally erupted, and as soon as Hindley returned, he degraded Heathcliff to a servant, assigning him the dirtiest and most tiring tasks, making him eat and live with the servants, denying him education, and forbidding him from seeing Catherine.
Faced with Hindley's actions, Heathcliff silently endured, burying the seeds of hatred in his heart. Love can save, but hatred not only destroys others but also oneself. Once planted, the seeds of this hatred would grow into a terrible force. Fortunately, there was Catherine. She had grown into a beautiful and lively young lady, who would teach Heathcliff everything she learned and accompany him in work and play. They didn't care about punishment, whether it was reciting the Bible or being whipped. As long as they were together, they disregarded those penalties. Catherine's love could be said to be the only sunshine illuminating Heathcliff's dark life. However, one time while out, Catherine unexpectedly fell ill. During her recovery, she met Edgar, the young master of Thrushcross Grange. Edgar was refined and had excellent manners. For Catherine, who grew up in the seclusion of Wuthering Heights, he presented a fatal temptation. She had never seen such a gentle man. She stayed at Thrushcross Grange for 5 weeks, experiencing luxurious parties and beautiful dresses. All this beauty awakened Catherine's vanity. When she returned to Wuthering Heights, Catherine was no longer the untamed wild child she used to be. She changed into a shiny, elegant young lady. The contrast between the two was so stark that when Heathcliff saw his own grimy face and hands, and the clothes he hadn't changed in 3 months, he felt inferior. He hid behind a chair, and Catherine noticed him hiding there. But the joy of their reunion overwhelmed her. She paid no attention to those details, rushed over, kissed Heathcliff's face, and earnestly suggested, "You should wash your face and comb your hair, you'll look more decent." However, Heathcliff felt mocked and abruptly withdrew his hand, shouting, "I like to be dirty." Then he angrily stormed out. Later on, Catherine and Heathcliff made up, but their relationship changed. That was because Catherine had something else in her heart. She was filled with longing for high society life.
Since returning from Thrushcross Grange, Catherine had been in frequent contact with the Lintons. Whenever she was with them, Catherine never showed rudeness. She wanted to get along well with the Lintons, to be as gentle and graceful as Edgar's sister, and to demonstrate her ladylike manners in front of them. However, when the Lintons expressed disgust towards Heathcliff, Catherine never defended her companion. she pretended to be indifferent. But when she was alone at home, she discarded that facade and turned into a carefree little madcap, playing with Heathcliff. Heathcliff also expressed his disdain for the Lintons. They were different kinds of people. At this point, Catherine wouldn't agree with him either. She found herself caught between the Lintons and Heathcliff, feeling truly torn and experiencing a fractured life.
One day, Hindley was out, and Heathcliff wanted to spend time with Catherine. However, Catherine invited Edgar Linton and his sister Isabella over. Heathcliff complained, "Cathy, you spend more time with the Lintons than with me." Facing this reproach, Catherine suddenly erupted. "What do you talk about? You might be dumb or a baby, for anything you say to amuse me, or for anything you do either."
One day, Hindley was out, and Heathcliff wanted to spend time with Catherine. However, Catherine invited Edgar Linton and his sister Isabella over. Heathcliff complained, "Cathy, you spend more time with the Lintons than with me." Facing this reproach, Catherine suddenly erupted, "What do you talk about? You might be dumb or a baby, for anything you say to amuse me, or for anything you do either." Heathcliff was shocked. "You never told me before that I talked too little, or that you disliked my company, Cathy," exclaimed Heathcliff in much agitation. "It's no company at all when people know nothing and say nothing," she muttered.
At that moment, Edgar Linton arrived. He was entering as Heathcliff was exiting. In that instant, Catherine clearly noticed the difference between the two. It was so obvious. The contrast was like switching from a desolate, coal-mining area to a beautiful, fertile valley. Indeed, they were people from different classes. Through years of hard labor, Heathcliff's early education had vanished. Now he had become sluggish, coarse in appearance, and his childhood experiences had made him very solitary, which later evolved into near-brutal insensitivity.
For a few acquaintances around him, Heathcliff deliberately aroused their disgust instead of respect, deriving a sick pleasure from it, as if seeking revenge. So, he was vastly different from Edgar Linton. Catherine welcomed Edgar's arrival, wanting to send Mrs. Dean away, but Mrs. Dean refused. So Catherine, as usual, ruthlessly pinched Mrs. Dean's arm. This caused Mrs. Dean extreme pain, and she cried out, "Miss, you have no right to pinch me." Seeing Catherine treat those around her so brutally in front of the Lintons made her feel ashamed and embarrassed. Hastily denying it, she said, "I didn't do that." Mrs. Dean pointed to the bruise on her arm, exposing her lie, which ignited Catherine's inner wildness. Feeling humiliated, she slapped Mrs. Dean hard, leaving Edgar astonished. Seeing his beloved girl's tantrum and hypocrisy, he was very surprised. He stepped in to intervene, but Catherine instinctively slapped him too. Edgar was shocked. No one had ever treated him like this before. He stood there for a moment, then walked out pale-faced. Finally realizing the severity of the situation, Catherine didn't want Edgar to leave. But Edgar said that Catherine frightened him, and he would never come back again. Catherine burst into tears, saying, "I'll be miserable all night if you go like this." Out of politeness, kindness, and sympathy, Edgar hesitated when he reached the yard, then turned back and went back into the house.
After this incident, Edgar decided to propose to Catherine, and she agreed. But Catherine had a secret. She didn't love Linton, she loved Heathcliff. If Hindley had not brought Heathcliff so low, I shouldn't have thought of marrying anyone else. It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, so he shall never know how I love him, and that, not because he's handsome, Nellie, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, and Linton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning, or frost from fire. As Catherine spoke these words, Heathcliff was nearby. When he heard Catherine say that marrying him would degrade herself, he felt deeply humiliated and quietly walked away. While Catherine proclaimed, "Who is to separate us, pray? They'll meet the fate of Milo. Not as long as I live, Ellen. For no mortal creature, every Linton on the face of the earth might melt into nothing before I could consent to forsake Heathcliff." "Oh, that's not what I intend. That's not what I mean. I shouldn't be Mrs. Linton were such a price demanded. He'll be as much to me as he has been all his lifetime." Edgar must shake off his antipathy, and tolerate him at least. You see, Catherine was so contradictory. Although she understood how important Heathcliff was to her, she knew her feelings for him, yet she still accepted Edgar's proposal. Heathcliff never imagined that amidst status and power, his relationship with Catherine could be so easily discarded. So on a stormy night, Heathcliff left in anger, leaving Wuthering Heights behind.
The deeper the love, the more painful the hurt. When one considers their love to be their entire life, losing them means the end of life itself. For Heathcliff, Catherine was everything. So when he thought that Catherine abandoned him, the world turned dark, and he felt like a monster abandoned in the moor. It was at this moment that the gears of fate began to turn.